Hi, and welcome to another episode of the Financial Freedom Podcast. I'm Steve Richardson, a bankruptcy attorney trying to keep people on their path to financial stability and independence through education. The cost of a college education is getting higher and higher. Students are graduating with crushing debt and are either unable to find a job or can't get one that will earn them enough money to pay the loans. Parents often get into debt by co-signing loans or sacrificing their retirement. That's why in this episode of the podcast, I wanted to talk to someone who could provide advice and strategies on approaching the cost of higher education and making sure that parents and students have a plan in place way before they decide on a school. My guest today is Brad Baldridge, one of the nation's leading college financial experts. He teaches parents the best ways to save and pay for college, including how to find the right school, maximize financial aid and scholarships, avoid student loan debt, and make your children's college dreams come true without wiping out your finances or your retirement. For over 20 years, he has shared his expertise and insights through his private practice as a blogger and host of the Taming the High Cost of College podcast, and as a presenter at numerous workshops and seminars. Welcome to the show, Brad.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah. So let's talk about college and where students are. So I guess we beginning at the beginning. We have a high school senior. We're into December now as we record this, and they're probably filling out the FAFSA form online to get started and choosing a school. What do you recommend as the first steps? They're, like I said, they're in this situation. They're looking at schools. They visited several. They have a list, and they're filling out this form to get started to figure out how to pay for it. Walk us through the initial steps that you recommend that people do.
Right. Yeah. I mean, ideally, this, senior year is the end of the process. This should be starting sophomore year or even
Okay.
freshman year. I think that's one of the challenges. Is a lot of families remember how we did it when we were kids, and it was a much more laid back process, right? We would pick a school at the end of junior year, sometime in senior year. Maybe we'd visit, maybe we wouldn't. A lot of times we took the tests once and just kind of went off, and that's the way it worked. Well, now a lot of students are applying to 5 or 10 colleges, and they need to visit, and going out of state is much more likely. That's becoming more of much more higher percentage of students are going out of state or across the country, and it's becoming a much bigger deal. And of course, the price has gone up crazy amounts. The inflation rate for college costs has been very high for a long time. That's the bad news. The good news is it has stopped going up at the crazy high rates, because they've kind of gotten to the point where the markets won't bear additional increases. So a lot of the colleges are raising their prices still, but they're also raising their scholarships and other aid. So the net cost is going up still, but it's going up at a much slower, more like just with inflation, not double inflation like it used to be.
Right.
So
all right. So I guess the first step is that we're not really starting when they're, the fall of their senior year. We're really starting, as you say, back in the sophomore year. So, all right, let's step it back a couple of years. And we've got a college sophomore. What are the initial steps from there?
Right. So if you think about the college timeline, all the deadlines that the college put out there are the senior year. So you must apply by early senior year, do financial aid early senior year. They'll give you offers in the middle of the senior year, and May of your senior year, you pick a college. So those are the hard deadlines. But we need to set deadlines for ourselves so that we're ready for the senior year. And that means we need to do stuff sophomore and junior year.
Okay.
So what I tell people, by the end of the junior year, you need to have a school list you're happy with, test scores you're proud of, a plan for scholarships, and have done your research in order to build that school list. So not just, oh, these are the schools we think we like, but these are the schools we like. We know what they're going to cost. We've seen them and visited them. We believe they're a good fit, and we can afford them, based on what we've done. And so that changes the process a lot, where in the past it was, well, you apply to the school, then you find out what it costs, and then you go. Well, what if it costs a lot of money? And that's where I think a lot of parents feel painted into a corner because it's a very emotional time and they didn't do their homework well. And now they're looking at a price tag that they can't afford. And a lot of times the quick and easy solution is, we'll sign up for that loan. That's, it's too late now. We're kind of committed. We didn't do things as well as we could have perhaps, but now the solution is we're too far down the road. We're just going to sign up for the loan. And to avoid those problems is, like I said, to start earlier. So when we do college planning, you can look at the process as the things that the student does, the things that the parents do, and the things that the students and parents do together.
Mm-hmm.
So hopefully the student is choosing major, figuring out what they want to be when they grow up. They're doing the applications, they're doing the essay, and you laugh, but there are a lot of parents out there that are, making, you're going to be a doctor or a lawyer is the old, joke, right? Of, well, pick one. It's like, but anyway, right? So the student does all that. Then the parents, their side of it is more like, well, what's our budget? What can we afford? Will we get need-based aid and merit aid? And what schools are a good fit? And then together they visit schools, they come up with a scholarship plan and a testing plan, and then kind of work together on those things. Mm-hmm. The challenge with some families is, a lot of students are, need to grow up a little bit. A typical sophomore doesn't know what they want to be when they grow up, and maybe it's a little too early to, to visit schools and that type of thing. But that doesn't mean the parents can't do the parent side. Mm-hmm. I think, because I hear a lot of parents say things like, well, we don't know what to do because little Johnny or little Susie doesn't know what she wants to be when she grows up. Mm-hmm. It's like, well, yes, that's a real issue where you can't choose a school because you can't choose a major, but you still need to move forward. So, and a lot of times I think that the log jam is the students don't have enough information to make quality decisions. Mm-hmm. So sometimes I think the decisions are, let's get out there and look at a couple schools. When you ask a 16-year-old, do you want to go to a big school or a small school? They say, well, I don't know. Mm-hmm. And they probably don't, because they've never seen a big school and a small school. They don't have a good frame of reference. So for a lot of families, I recommend, as an example, doing some preliminary visits where sometime in the sophomore year or early junior year, you visit some colleges, not because they're necessarily going to go to those colleges. Now, if it is a school that might be on their list, great. But a lot of times you're just going to visit a school because it's local and convenient, mm-hmm. right? I'm going to do the local state school in our town or near our town happens to be a big urban school. So we'll go look at that one. And then we're going to also go to this small school that's in a suburb. And then we're going to go to this, medium-sized school that's out in the cornfields and get an idea of, well, what, how do these compare? Mm-hmm. And then based on that, students might say, I really want to be urban. I don't really want to be urban, or I need a big school. I need a small school. Or none of that matters. What I really need is fill in the blank. Mm-hmm. So that again, there's thousands of schools. How do you narrow it down? Well, that's how that's where you start, right? Is what are some criteria that are important so that we can kind of narrow the list. We're looking for large urban schools that have chemistry majors. That's a lot shorter list than, all the schools within 200 miles.
And is the child comfortable going to a school far away from home? Or right. Do they want to stay closer to home, no matter the size of the school? Yep. There may, I'm here in New Jersey, and they may not, the child may not be comfortable going to UCLA or some or Stanford or some other school on the other side of the country, being that far away from home.
Right. Absolutely. So that's, again, kind of where you might start with students, and then as parents, to do your side of it is, starting to delve into, will you qualify for need-based aid? Will you qualify for merit aid? A good practice would be to, choose a local state school and see what it costs and get an estimate of how state aid might work for you and get an estimate of federal aid, and then look at, well, a lot of times the local state school is kind of the price to beat. So in states where the state schools are a little bit more expensive, say 30, 32,000, a student can typically borrow 5,500, and maybe they can earn 4,000 or 5,000 through the year, summers, nights, weekends, whatever, whatever they want to do. Mm-hmm. So maybe a student can raise 10,000, but if the school costs 30,000, well, there's a 20,000 gap.
Right.
And most of the time that's going to fall on the parents. The typical middle income and up parent, it's going to just fall on the parents. Mm-hmm. Now, if you qualify for federal aid, again, incomes, family incomes below, say, 90,000, you might qualify for some federal aid, and incomes below 50,000, you might qualify for like the maximum Pell, let's say. So maximum Pell right now is about 7,400. Mm-hmm. So now at that expensive school that started at 32, now we can take off another 7,400. So now we're down to about 13,000 left for the parents. Mm-hmm. If they've got 10 or 20,000 saved, well, that could be another 5,000 a year that they could take from savings. So you just kind of build that out and take all these different chunks and put them together. Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of the process. And then from there, well, we don't want to go to the local state school. Okay, well, what about the flagship state school? What about the local privates, the faraway privates, the Ivy League, whatever it is? Right now you're starting to expand from there. But I've written a few articles around, there's different types of schools and they interact financially differently, depending on what they are. As an example, Stanford had a press release a couple of years ago that said if your income is below $100,000, then our tuition and room and board will be free. We'll pay for it all. Wow. If your income is between 100,000 and 150,000, then tuition will be zero, but you may have to pay some towards room and board. Well, Stanford's an $80-some thousand school, but it, again, based on those criteria, for a lot of people, it's not, right? They're very generous with need-based aid. Mm-hmm. Now, the caveat, of course, is you got to get accepted to Stanford, which is no small feat. They're highly, highly selective. Your student's going to need to be a rock star. Mm-hmm. But if they have a shot at Stanford, a lot of parents would say, well, we're not going to go to Stanford. It's 80-some thousand. We can't afford that. And it's like, even at middle and high incomes, it may not be 80, it might be 20, or it might be 40, or it might be 60, or it might be 80. So you really need to understand the different options and how to deal with, again, the need-based and the merit-based system. Because I've seen many times that private school come in that's very competitive with the state school, and sometimes they even better than the state school. Mm-hmm.
Well, so we're talking about cost of attendance and sort of doing your homework on that. And the earlier you start, obviously, the better. What resource would you recommend to find out, what the tuition is, average room and board, and if you're a sophomore, what it's going to be in 2 years? How do parents and students get that in?
Right. So I have a lot of it on my website. So I've got some free resources. And one of the resources that fits that bill is we have a cost of colleges by state. So we have actually you can go look up cost of colleges, for Wisconsin or for Illinois or whatever it is, and it shows you most of the state schools and then a bunch of the private schools. And not only does it show you the list price, which is total cost of attendance, but it also shows you a net price based on income. Okay. Now it's all averages, so you can't rely on it entirely. Mm-hmm. But a typical college, so off of my memory, here in Wisconsin, our flagship state school, if your income is between 75 and 110, their average cost was $24,000. Mm-hmm. Well, there's a couple of private schools in Wisconsin where their average cost is $24,000. Mm-hmm. At that same income level. Now, the state school starts at 28,000 and you get a little bit of aid and it's down to 22 on average. The private schools are 50 and 60 and 70, but they also get to 22 because they offer 10 or 20 or $30,000 scholarships and need-based aid and other things to get you competitive.
Mhm.
That's the reality, right? Most schools know what your local state school is going to cost, and they know where they need to be competitive.
Mhm.
So Harvard can say, we're Harvard and this is what we cost, and either you pay it or you don't come. And lots
Right.
of people will say, we'll pay it because they believe Harvard is worth it. But there's a short list of schools that have that kind of pricing power where they get what they ask for no matter what.
Mhm.
A lot of the smaller and less known private schools now, maybe they have to give everybody 10 or 20,000 off, and for kids they really want, they have to give them 30,000 off based on their academics and that type of thing. So I think the challenge with shopping for college is it's like shopping for a car, except all the cars have a list price, but then the negotiation at some places could be substantially different than others, right? So that car's 50,000 and that car's 50,000. But over here, if you bring in a coupon, all of a sudden that one's half price. It's like, oh, I wish I would have known that before I bought this other car. And it's been very opaque for a long time, and we've got software now that helps us learn that, and we've got like again the resources on their website and that type of thing,
Mhm.
where we have a better understanding now of what it may actually cost.
Mhm. Now, the cost of attendance, we're looking at, the tuition and room and board, but there, of course, can be other expenses that go along with going to that school that would be included in cost of attendance. One example would be, like the person in New Jersey who goes to Stanford. Well, you're going to be flying them back and forth.
Right.
So you've got the cost of those airline tickets coast to coast that you
Right.
need to
Exactly.
look into. So, what other beyond tuition and room and board, what expenses related to attendance to the school do you recommend that parents and students look at as far as the overall pricing process?
Right. Yeah. When you start delving into the details, certainly some families have higher expenses than others because of travel or because of dietary or medical and that type of stuff. And certainly you want to factor those in. But I mean, technically, cost of attendance is an official term when you're doing financial aid and that type of thing. So officially, cost of attendance by definition is tuition, room and board, books, fees, and pizza. Okay. So the typical cost of a student. So they put money in there for personal expenses, travel, books, and then the bill, which would be tuition and room and board typically,
Right.
and fees. So on top of the bill you get from the school, when you're living on campus, that's tuition, room, and board.
Mm-hmm.
To go along with that, they give you an allotment for personal expenses. That's cell phone and dates and laundry and whatever else, and a lot of that is already covered. Kids already have their cell phone and they're part of the plan with the family, whatever. But that's included. And then travel is another piece. So some colleges will adjust that travel number if you ask them to, and that may make you eligible for a bit more of a loan or a bit more of aid. When you are in that situation where, hey, we live in Jersey and we're going to Stanford, it's very obvious your travel expenses are going to be much higher than someone that's already on the West Coast.
Right. Exactly. So there's that. Are there any other ways to save on some of these costs? Maybe some finance hacks or tips and tricks on how to save on those costs?
Well, absolutely, right. There's probably 100 strategies or more that families can use to reduce their overall cost of college.
Mm-hmm.
As an example, there's tax credits that phase out between 160 and 180,000 if you're married, and 80 and 90,000 if you're single. And if you're close to those edges, then maybe doing some planning so that you get to keep those tax credits can make a difference. Now, again, it's $2,500 a year, so that's $10,000. That's when there's things you can do around need-based aid. These things count against you; those things don't. How do we structure our life so that we get more need-based aid? Making sure our college savings and investments are appropriate from a tax perspective and from a investment perspective makes sense. Sometimes we can earn a little more, or we can save some taxes, or whatever that might be. So that is a big area that you can look at. You can appeal the process. You can negotiate with the schools. Now, you're not truly negotiating. It's not my lawyer is going to beat up your lawyer. It's a more of a, can you help me? You know, I really want to come to your school, but you're $10,000 more than the one that mom and dad want to send me to. You know, and ideally it's the student that's involved here, right? I love this school. I really want to come here. But mom and dad, you know, and again, give the student permission to throw mom and dad under the bus and just say, you know, but mom and dad won't pay for it. So I'm stuck. Can you help me? Is there more money? Is there more loans? Is there more, you know, more money that can help fill the gap? Now, sometimes there is a loan, but oftentimes there's not. And what there is, oh, we can give you another 4,000 or 5,000 of scholarships. Well, that gets you here. And obviously that's 4,000 or 5,000 better than it was. So it can't hurt to ask. Strategies around, well, making sure you have schools on the list that will come in at a good price, so you're in a good position to negotiate, right? You're not going to be able to go to Harvard and say, well, that local community college is much cheaper. Well, they're going to say, yes, it is, and good luck. If you went to Harvard and said, well, for some reason Princeton is coming in at a much better price, they might say, oh, well, let's go check our numbers. Maybe we did something wrong, or, you know, and again, there's opportunity there. And that's at every level, right? Even, you know, the smaller state schools or the smaller private schools, again, aren't going to try and compete with the local community college, but they would compete with each other. And some schools are very, you know, set in stone. You know, this is our offer. It's not changing. Don't even ask. Other schools, I've had parents come out of meetings and they essentially said, you know, we talked about the price and they said, well, here's what we can do. And if this isn't good enough, let us know. Well, obviously that wasn't good enough. Let them know, right? I mean, they just said, we've got more money if you want it. Okay, well, I guess we want it, right? So I think that's you know, so like I said, there's varying levels of that when it comes to how the process works. And sometimes families are a little bit more in the driver's seat because they've got choices and they can draw a line in the sand and just say, well, if you can't get here, when we're not coming, and they can mean it. But that means you had to do the better homework, right? You can't be the person that didn't do any homework and then you say, well, okay, well, I've got 5 choices. They're all crazy expensive. Now what do I do? Right? What you needed to do is say, well, here's some opportunities where we can get maybe some low cost offers. And maybe they're not the number 1 choice of the school, of the student. Maybe they're number 3. But again, if some parents are going to be in that situation, right? If you say, well, here's our 5 schools, and this one's 25,000, and this one's 30,000, and this one's 35,000, this one's 50,000, and this one's 70,000, and you go, okay, well, the 70,000 is out no matter what. And then the 4 that are left, which one's your favorite for the student? And they might say, oh, the next most expensive, right? The 50,000 one. And then my recommendation is, as a parent, to say, well, can the student articulate why that school is worth $10,000 or $20,000 more than the others? You know, if they come back with, well, the tour guide was cute. Well, yes, but the tour guide will graduate by the time you get there. So maybe that doesn't matter. But, you know, again, trying to figure out, but all of that is the end of the process. And to set that up well, you got to do the proper thing sophomore and junior year. And that's why why we're talking about, you know, starting earlier, have some time to understand what you're getting into, you know, instead of letting the student drive the process and not really understanding. And then at the last minute, you know, realize, oh, we should have applied over here. Now I understand. And now we should have done these things. I should have done those things. And then, you know, for some families, it's, well, we messed up with our oldest and we know better now. But of course, things change there as well, depending on the students. Not all, you know, I've had a lot of families where their oldest is a, you know, music performing artist and the next one's an engineer, and all the stuff they learned as the music and performing arts process is a lot different for engineers. And, you know, so there's a lot of change there. So I think for a lot of families, it's really trying to figure out, you know, what strategies will work for you. What are your real opportunities? You know, are you considering out-of-state schools? Are you considering private schools? And don't automatically cross them off because you think they're expensive. For some, they're not much different. for others they are. So that's, kind of the homework of, well, which schools are going to be at what price points for our situation. And the way it worked for your brother-in-law or the way it worked for your, friends with older kids may or may not apply to you, because there's a lot of factors involved. So it's based on the academics of the student, and the finances of the family. And if all of that's the same, well, then they might be a good representation. But a lot of times I will have parents say things like, well, this kid over here got a ton of scholarships. Well, that family earns a lot less than you do. So they got need-based aid at a school that only offers need-based aid. When you applied there, they don't offer they only offer need-based, no merit aid. So, and because you don't show a need, you're not going to get any aid. We knew that. We could have known that going in. But again, a lot of times the information we get at the soccer game or whatever it is from the older parents isn't complete, and that, they don't understand the whole process.
Well, you're talking about, I want this school, but mom and dad won't pay for it. Let's talk a little bit about, the parents' end of this, especially if they have more than one child that they've got to do this with, and coping with that financial obligation. They might be tempted to, reach into that IRA or retirement account or whatever to get the money to pay for it, or sacrifice some other asset or part of their financial plan. How do parents deal with that? How do they do that without screwing up their retirement and their future, in order to try and ensure their child's?
Right. Well, let me give you an example. So I had a dad come to me about 4 years ago, I guess it was, and his daughter was very interested in the performing arts. She was a singer and dancer and very talented. I mean, again, I don't know her, so I'm taking this from dad, and maybe dad was a little biased. But she wanted to go to the Tisch performing at NYU. So very prestigious, very competitive, and she got accepted. And NYU is $75,000, and they offered a scholarship of about $30,000 or $35,000. So the net price was going to be $35,000. Mm-hmm. And he looked at that and said, well, $35,000 a year times 4 years, that's $140,000. And this is my oldest of four. Mm-hmm. Oh, so 140,000 times 4, well, that's a big number. Can we afford to do that? So we had to kind of dive in and really figure out, well, what was available and how much, could they afford $2,000 a month or $3,000 a month for college for the next 5 years, 10 years, 20 years? What resources were we working with? And then kind of do the math and say, this is how it worked. And it turns out, he had a decent income, and they were getting close to paying off the house, and they were good savers. So they could make it happen and offer a similar package to all the kids if they needed it. But the other question that they had to kind of soul search around is, just because we spent a lot of money on our oldest, does that mean we have to spend money on the next? Or, and some parents would say, no way, right? To each their needs. Other parents say, no, it's got to be exactly equal, right? If we give 140,000 for our oldest, we're going to give 140 to the next one. And if they don't spend it on college, then they get to spend it on a wedding, or they get to spend it on a house, or they, but however, we're going to give them each the same dollar amount or whatever, right? And again, there's no right or wrong there, right? The two examples I gave you, some would say this one's better than that one, but that's, again, opinion. And it doesn't matter which one you pick. It's just something to think through as you're laying out this plan, right? So that's a great example. And what I've discovered is, for most families, when they say, come to me, they say, we'd like to pay for college and we'd like to retire comfortably, and we don't want to mess this up and mess up our retirement. So and then the next question, are you on track for retirement? Well, I don't know. Okay, well, if you don't even know if we're on track for retirement, what do we have to mess up, right? So it gets to be a little bit more of a process of, okay, well, to meet your retirement goals, you're currently, maybe you need to save $1,500 a month from now till retirement. And then they look at each other and say, well, that's great, because we're already saving $3,000 a month. It's like, okay, well then good, you're on track, and maybe you could retire early. Or if you wanted to, you could actually back off on retirement and shift that to college.
Mhm.
Other families, the exact same situation. You need to save 1,500 from now till retirement to get to your retirement goal, and they go, "Oh, gee, that's not so good because we're only saving 500." So now they need 1,000 to cover retirement that they didn't know they needed, and we're saying, and we need 1,000 a month for college, or 3,000 a month for college
Mhm.
for the next 3 years, 5 years, 10 years. Now again, and that's where some families go, "Oh, well, now that we know that, I guess we'll sell the lake home. We've been pouring money into it, or the sailboat, or we'll stop spending crazy amount of money on dance lessons for all the kids." Or, and again, a lot of families can make it work. They just have to choose to, right?
Mhm.
And it boils down to, for a lot of families too, that's the caution, right? Is if you learn how to spend every penny you make and then try and squeeze college in, it's painful at any income. I've had, families earning 150,000 say, well, 1,000 a month, that's no problem. And I've had families earning, 200,000 tell me, oh no, we don't have any money at all. It's all committed to, again, typically they have a bigger house, a higher mortgage, they have different situation, and nothing right or wrong about it. But if your number one goal is retirement, and your number two goal is educating the kids, and then you look at where all your money's going, and it's going everywhere except retirement and educating the kids, that's a challenge. I don't know how to solve that challenge, but for many families, so if you've got younger kids, or college is coming, that's another area where using that context when you make those decisions about, well, should we remodel the house, or should we move into an even bigger house, or should we commit ourselves to a big mortgage, or should we buy the lake home with a big mortgage? And it's like, I can't answer that. It's a choice for most families. Again, for many families, they can afford to spend crazy amounts on college. They can afford to have a lake home. They can afford to have a lot of toys. They can afford to take big vacations. What they can't afford is to do all of those things. They're going to have to pick the ones that are appropriate for them.
Right. And this is all part of their financial plan, and I think that's the important takeaway here. The earlier you start the planning process for college, the earlier you're able to make some of these adjustments, perhaps, and making sure that you're on track for retirement, and realize that these are parallel paths, and you
Right.
need to prioritize and say, all right, do we need to send a certain amount of money towards retirement and another amount towards the children's education? And the more you know about the expense of education, the easier it is to do that. But early planning, it seems to me, is the key to making sure you don't screw up your retirement in trying to educate your children.
Right. And another concept is, if you can do everything a little more efficient, then you can add one more I want, or one more thing from the wish list onto the pile. If you can pay for retirement more efficiently, you can pay for education more efficiently, then there might be some left over, so you can still have those vacations or whatever else. But that's where planning comes in, and can make a big difference. Of, are we doing everything we can around taxes and costs and expenses and interest rates, and shuffling the things around in a proper way? Because a lot of times I see families where they're, maybe their insurance portfolio isn't right, and they're spending an extra 1,000 a month they shouldn't, or they've got credit card debt that they're paying 32% on for no good reason other than they just haven't bothered to clean it up and come up with a better path. So, sometimes there's easy wins, sometimes it's a little more complicated, but I think that's where, for a lot of families, you got to spend the time to work at it and figure it out, or outsource it. I mean, because if just to say, well, I don't have time to deal with this, so I'm going to go ahead and waste money, doesn't make sense either.
Well, we were talking about private schools and public schools and everything, and the conventional wisdom seems to be that in-state schools can be much more affordable and less expensive option than a private school. Is that true, or can private schools be in reach for parents and students?
Yeah, well, again, absolutely. So the private schools are a little more all over the map.
Mm-hmm.
what's nice about your local state school is I'm not likely to get aid in many instances, but it's a low price to begin with. So, right, it started at 28,000. Let's say the student can borrow 5,500 and earn, so it's going to cost parents 18,000.
Mm-hmm.
And it's pretty known, right? They're not going to suddenly raise the price. It's not dependent on a scholarship program that could change. It's pretty set. So that's the price to beat. And then you can say, all right, well, this private school over here has given us a great offer, and they're within a few thousand. Maybe they're a couple thousand better, a couple thousand worse. And then there's the students that hit it out of the park, right? They get the zero tuition offer from a private school, right? A lot of private schools will have 10 or 20 students on campus that pay zero because they've got some sort of scholarship program or multiple scholarship programs where, they're well endowed. One of our local schools calls it the McAllister Scholarship Program. I'm sure there's a Mr. or Mrs. McAllister whose money is behind it. And those students don't pay any tuition. And for some of those students, they don't pay any room and board. Now they invite 15 or 20 students to interview, and then they award a certain number. And I don't know, can't remember the exact statistics, but again, I think they invite 15 to 20 to interview, and maybe 6 or 8 will win. Now, if you don't win the McAllister Scholarship, there's got consolation prizes that are still really good. But if you have what it takes to be a McAllister Scholar at that school, you just have to be aware it exists and do your best and go for it. And then if you're the McAllister, well, great. And if that doesn't work out, maybe you're doing that same thing at 5 schools where you're going to have really low cost options, and that will beat the cost of a state school hands down. Now, to be that top scholar at Notre Dame is a lot different than being that top scholar at Marquette or Gonzaga. And that's a lot different than at, some little school that nobody's ever heard of. Right. So that's, I think, another decision that a lot of families don't realize is when you've got that academic rock star that can get accepted. Well, if they can get accepted to Stanford, as we mentioned, they're very generous. So maybe that's your route where you're under 150,000, so it'll be low cost. If they can't get accepted to Stanford, or they're close, but you don't know for sure, they could be that rock star at some other school. So, for families that have those strong academic kids, they've got a lot more options and a lot more complications potentially as well because of those options. So starting earlier and understanding once again.
Yeah, that could be 2 different things. So we're talking about college, but a lot of times kids go beyond an undergraduate degree and go on to a graduate degree, whether it's an MBA, a law degree, a medical degree. And if people are looking at graduate schools versus undergraduate, is there any advice that you have specific to that, or is it pretty much the same process that you've described?
All right. It's actually substantially different. And it's important to understand that. So the first undergraduate degree, again, for the typical student, they're going to be mom and dad's dependent. Mom and dad are going to be part of the process unless that student can be independent. Now, to be independent, the student needs to be married, separate from active military service, have dependents of their own, be part of a federal runaway program. They're pretty harsh things. So the typical parent is not going to say, here's how we're going to pay for college. Why don't you go get married? That's not a plan that a lot of families are willing to do. But if your student happened to be married, by all means, take advantage of it. But another way that you become independent is have an undergraduate degree completed, which now all of a sudden you no longer report mom and dad. Mom and dad are not involved, and it completely shifts to where now it's based on the student's income and assets for need-based aid and that type of thing. Well, most students are very poor. That's, almost a given, right? And because of that, there's not the scholarship process is different. Most schools don't offer a lot of scholarships. Instead, what happens is there's a lot of loan programs. So we've heard about the doctor that borrowed his way through med school and all that kind of stuff. And that's real, where year after year after year, they're borrowing $50,000 or $75,000 to pay for everything and graduating with $400,000 in debt. Now, a lot of these, doctors go on to successful careers and they earn enough to be able to pay it back. But the caveat there is that even that is getting so pricey that the math doesn't work for unless you go to the right specialty or you do the right thing sometimes. So, so that's one important thing. Another avenue is there's a lot of students out there that say, I'm pre-law, I'm pre-med. And then there's a lot of other degrees that are master's level or PhD level that are less known. They're the physician assistant and physical therapist and, anesthetologist assistant or whatever. That might be a master's level where you're not a doctor, but you're not, a lot of them in the medical field, especially, and then the MBA but all those things, some colleges now offer what we would call direct admit programs, where you go to the, maybe you do 3 years of undergrad, you kind of compress it, and then 2 years of grad school, all at the same college, all straight through, and you're accepted at the beginning. So you're a strong student, you get accepted as long as you maintain a 3.0 or 3.2 or whatever the rules are and do the right things, you're guaranteed a spot in the PA school or the PT school or the MD or whatever it might be. And some families look at that and like that idea because it's very, some of these medical schools and that type of thing are very competitive where, you got to have a 3.9 in order to get accepted to this program over here. But if you do direct admit, you're in already. All you have to do is maintain a 3.2 and your spot is saved for you. So those direct admit programs are, and it's a little self-serving for the universities because they get strong undergrad kids that will then go on to be strong graduate. They kind of lock them in early, so they know they've got them for 5 or 6 years. But there's certainly a plus there too. So it's a win-win for everyone. In those situations where it's a good fit, if you're saying, well, maybe medical, maybe dental, maybe physical therapy, or maybe MBA, right? I mean, I'm kind of all over the map. Well, that may not be a good path then to be locked into a particular path because you haven't nailed it yet. But I think a lot of people aren't aware of the various direct admit programs that might come into play when you pick your undergrad.
All right, well, that's great. A lot of good information. I understand, and I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast that you have a podcast that you do. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your podcast and how it can help people and how they can find it?
Right. So my podcast is Taming the High Cost of College. And I also have a website, tamingthehighcostofcollege.com. So obviously my podcast is available wherever the podcasts are sold, as they say. And my website, we've got all kinds of free resources, scholarship guide for busy parents, the price of colleges by state, as I mentioned earlier. There's a tab there that's resources where you can find a lot of the top resources, and then lots of articles and information. You can sign up for a free email newsletter. If you want to, reach out, we've got a course that we've launched that helps people figure this out if you want to kind of do it yourself, or you can call us and reach out to us directly if you need to.
Great. Well, I'll be sure to leave links to all that in the show notes, folks. So if you're interested in learning more from Brad about how he can help you to make sure your child launches his or her education affordably, then you can do that. So thanks for coming on the show, Brad. A lot of good stuff, a lot of good information for the listeners, and I appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Mm-hmm.